When a section of lawn turns brown and crunchy, most people do one of two things, and both of them can waste real money. Some people panic and start dumping extra water on it every single day, hoping to bring it back, when in some cases, no amount of water is going to fix what is actually going on underground. Other people assume the worst, give up on it completely, and start planning to rip it out and reseed a section that would have grown back on its own, with almost no effort at all. There is a 30-second test you can run right now that tells you which situation you are actually in, before you waste a drop of water or a single seed on the wrong fix. Quick note before we get into it, since this is exactly the kind of thing people ask me about constantly. If you are tired of guessing what your lawn actually needs and ending up wasting time and money on the wrong fix, I wrote a short ebook that walks you through your specific grass type, month by month, so you always know exactly what to do and when. Scan the QR code on screen or check the link in the description if you want a copy. Now, let's get into the test. Watering a genuinely dead patch of lawn does nothing for it no matter how much water you use, since a crown and root system that are no longer alive cannot respond to moisture at all, which means every gallon poured on that spot is simply wasted. On the flip side, tearing out and reseeding a section of lawn that was only dormant throws away grass that would have greened back up on its own within a few weeks, once conditions improved, and reseeding costs real money in seed, soil prep, and the water needed to establish new grass, all for a problem that did not actually need fixing. Getting this one diagnosis right at the start avoids both of those expensive mistakes, and the test itself takes less time than walking to the garage to grab the hose. Think about the two outcomes side by side for a second. A homeowner who waters a dead patch every day for 3 weeks straight has spent that entire stretch on a water bill increase for absolutely nothing, since the grass was never going to respond regardless of how much moisture it received. A homeowner who reseeds a section that was only dormant has spent money on seed, topsoil, and the extra watering needed to establish new grass, all to replace turf that was already alive and would have filled back in on its own within a matter of weeks. Both mistakes come from skipping the same 30-second check, and both are completely avoidable once you know what to actually look for instead of guessing from what the grass looks like on the surface. Grab a small handful of the brown, struggling grass and give it a firm, steady tug. If the blades pull up easily with almost no resistance, coming free of the soil without much effort at all, that is a strong sign the roots underneath have died and are no longer anchored into the ground. If instead the blades resist coming up, holding firmly in place even under a decent pull, that tells you the root system is still alive and functioning down in the soil, which is the single most reliable sign you are dealing with dormancy rather than death. This works because a living root system is physically gripping the surrounding soil particles, while a dead one has already begun to detach and decay, so the physical resistance you feel in your hand is a direct, immediate readout of what is actually happening below the surface where you cannot see it. Run this check in a few different spots across the affected area, rather than just one, since a single tug can occasionally give you a misleading result if you happen to grab a patch with unusually loose or unusually compact soil. Checking 3 or 4 spots and comparing what you feel gives you a much more reliable overall picture than relying on a single pull. If it has rained recently or you have watered heavily in the last day or two, it is worth waiting for the soil to dry out slightly before testing, since freshly saturated soil can occasionally make even dead roots feel a bit more anchored than they really are, throwing off the read you get from the tug alone. Once you have pulled a few blades, look closely at the crown, which is the small area right at soil level where the roots and the above-ground shoots connect. This is the part of the plant that matters most, since it is the growing point the entire plant regrows from. A healthy, dormant crown typically still shows some white or pale cream color, even while everything above it looks completely brown and dead. A crown that is fully dead usually looks dry, brittle, and uniformly brown or gray, all the way through, with no hint of that lighter color left anywhere in it. Checking both the tug resistance and the crown color together gives you a far more reliable read than either test on its own, since an ambiguous result on one test is usually clarified by the other. The crown matters so much here because it holds the plant's growing point along with whatever energy reserves it has managed to store up. As long as that specific piece of tissue is alive, the plant retains the ability to regrow every blade above it, no matter how brown and lifeless the rest of the plant currently looks. That is really the whole reason this test works as well as it does, since the visible leaf tissue tells you almost nothing reliable about whether the plant is alive, while the crown tells you almost everything. If the color is genuinely hard to judge on a single blade, pull a small clump instead of a single strand and compare several crowns side by side, since looking at several samples at once makes the difference between a pale cream color and a fully dead gray-brown much easier to spot than trying to judge it from one blade alone under uncertain lighting. Getting genuinely comfortable reading these signs on your own lawn, rather than guessing every time a patch looks rough, is exactly the kind of practical skill the ebook I put together walks you through in detail. The QR code is on screen now, or grab the link in the description if you want to check it out. Step back and look at how the brown areas are actually distributed across the lawn, since the overall pattern carries real information on its own. True summer dormancy in cool season grass tends to show up fairly evenly across large sections of the yard, or consistently in areas that share the same sun exposure and soil type, since the whole area is responding to the same heat and moisture conditions at the same time. Small, irregular dead patches scattered randomly, especially ones with sharply defined edges or an unusual shape, point towards something else entirely, like grub damage chewing through roots from below, a fungal disease spreading outward from a central point, or physical damage from something that sat on the lawn for too long. If the pattern looks random and patchy rather than broad and even, it is worth investigating that specific cause directly instead of assuming ordinary heat dormancy is the explanation, since treating the wrong cause wastes just as much time as skipping the diagnosis altogether. It also helps to think about how the brown areas line up with things you already know about the yard. A section that goes brown first every single summer, right along a slope or near a spot with thin, rocky soil, is very likely just dormancy showing up predictably in the driest, most exposed part of the property. A brand new patch that appeared suddenly in a section that has never had trouble before is more worth a closer look, since that kind of sudden, isolated change is less consistent with ordinary seasonal stress and more consistent with something specific happening in that one location. Taking a mental note of which areas of the yard have always struggled versus which ones are newly affected this year is a simple habit that makes this pattern check considerably faster and more accurate every time you run it in future seasons. A healthy, cool season lawn can typically survive somewhere around 4 to 6 weeks of dormancy without any lasting damage, sometimes longer if the crown was in good shape heading into the stressful period. During that stretch, the plant is not doing anything wrong by staying brown. It has pulled its energy down into the crown and root system on purpose, conserving what it has left rather than spending it on leaf growth it cannot currently support. This is worth knowing because a lot of people start to worry and intervene too early, right around week 2 or 3, when the grass is still well within a completely normal dormancy window and does not actually need any kind of dramatic fix at all. If you are past 6 weeks with no sign of green returning even after a period of cooler weather or consistent rain, that is the point where it becomes worth investigating further, rather than continuing to assume ordinary dormancy explains everything you are seeing. It is also worth remembering that dormancy is not an all-or-nothing switch that flips the entire lawn brown on day 1 and green again the moment stress ends. Grass can enter dormancy gradually as different areas cross their own individual stress threshold, and it typically greens back up gradually too, starting from the crown outward, rather than the whole yard flipping back to solid green overnight. Patience through that gradual transition, both going into dormancy and coming out of it, is a completely normal part of the process, rather than a sign that something has gone wrong. A stretch of cooler weather or a good soaking rain in the middle of a hot summer can sometimes trigger a brief flush of green in an otherwise dormant lawn, only for it to fade back to brown once the heat returns. And that kind of temporary flicker is not a sign the plant is confused or struggling, it is simply responding to a short window of better conditions before settling back into survival mode. Before increasing how much you water in response to a brown lawn, it is worth checking how much water the lawn is actually getting right now, since a lot of people assume they are underwatering when the real issue is something else entirely. Set a few empty tuna cans or shallow containers around the yard, run your irrigation system through a normal cycle, and measure how much water landed in each one. Most cool season lawns need somewhere around 1 to 1.5 inches of water a week, counting whatever rainfall you got, and running that simple test tells you whether you are actually falling short of that number or whether the lawn is getting plenty of water already and the real problem lies elsewhere. Confirming this before adding more water matters, because overwatering a genuinely dormant lawn does not speed up recovery, and it can actually invite fungal disease into grass that is already stressed and less able to fight it off. This same water audit also catches a second, completely different problem that often gets mistaken for dormancy or death, which is uneven sprinkler coverage. If your tuna can test shows one zone or one section of the yard consistently getting far less water than the rest, That uneven pattern alone can explain a patch of brown grass sitting right in the middle of an otherwise healthy lawn, and no amount of testing the grass itself will reveal that, since the problem is sitting in your irrigation system rather than in the plant. Running this same check a couple of times a season, not just when a problem shows up, is a good habit generally, since sprinkler heads shift, clog, or get knocked out of alignment over time, and a system that was watering evenly in spring is not guaranteed to still be doing so once the middle of summer rolls around. Knowing exactly how much water your specific lawn needs, rather than guessing and hoping, is exactly the kind of practical detail the ebook I wrote breaks down for your grass type and region. The QR code is on screen now, or grab the link in the description if you want a copy. If the tug test and crown check both point toward dormancy, the correct move is close to doing nothing, which feels counterintuitive but is exactly what the science supports. Give the lawn a light watering, somewhere around half an inch every 2 to 3 weeks, just enough to keep the crown alive without trying to force the whole plant back into active growth before it is ready. Stay off the dormant grass as much as possible, since foot traffic and anything sitting on top of it, like furniture or a trampoline, can crush a crown that does not have the spare energy to recover from that kind of physical stress right now. Avoid fertilizing during this stretch too, since nitrogen forces leaf growth the plant cannot currently support, and that forced growth burns through the very energy reserves the crown is trying to conserve. The green will return on its own once temperatures ease and consistent moisture returns, typically without you needing to do much of anything beyond that light maintenance watering. It genuinely feels strange to some people to do this little for a lawn that looks this rough, especially after spending money on the yard all spring, but every bit of extra intervention beyond that light watering schedule tends to work against the plant rather than for it during this specific stretch. The grass has already made the decision to conserve rather than grow, and the most useful thing you can do is simply respect that decision until conditions genuinely change. If the tug test comes up loose with almost no resistance, and the crown looks dry and uniformly brown, continuing to water that section on the same schedule as the rest of the lawn is not going to bring it back, so there is no reason to keep pouring extra water on it hoping for a different result. The honest fix at that point is reseeding or resodding once the timing is right for your grass type. Cool season grass in early fall and warm season grass in late spring, rather than continuing to treat a dead patch the same way you would treat a living, dormant one. In the meantime, it is worth figuring out why that specific section died in the first place rather than the rest of the lawn, since an isolated dead patch often points to something like grub damage, a buried object affecting root growth, a leaking or broken sprinkler head delivering too much or too little water to that one spot, or physical damage from something that sat there too long. And fixing that underlying cause first keeps the new seed or sod from failing in the exact same way. Once you know what actually happened, clear away the dead material, loosen the top layer of soil so new roots have something to grow into, and hold off on planting anything until the timing genuinely matches your grass type, since seed put down in the middle of summer heat rarely survives regardless of how well the rest of the prep work was done. Cool season grass seed does best going down in early to mid-fall, once daytime temperatures have eased and there is enough of the growing season left before winter for the new grass to establish a real root system. Warm season grass, by contrast, wants to go into soil that is already warm and reliably above about 65 degrees, which usually means waiting for late spring rather than rushing to fix a dead patch the moment you spot it. A few other issues get mistaken for simple heat dormancy constantly, and it is worth ruling them out quickly while you are already down there checking the grass. Grub damage shows up as a patch that lifts loosely like a piece of carpet when tugged, similar to true death, but peeling back the turf reveals small white C-shaped larvae feeding on the roots underneath, which points you toward a pest treatment rather than a watering or reseeding decision. Fungal disease tends to produce distinct circular or ring-shaped patches, sometimes with a darker border while conditions are wet, rather than the broad, even browning typical of heat dormancy. A concentrated dark green ring around a small dead center, especially in a spot your dog visits often, usually points to a urine spot rather than any kind of environmental stress at all. Running through these possibilities takes only another minute or two once you have already got a handful of grass out of the ground, and it saves you from applying the wrong fix to a problem that was never simple dormancy in the first place. A few less common lookalikes are worth a quick mention too. Chinch bugs tend to create irregular patches that expand slowly outward from a central point, often in the hottest, sunniest part of the lawn, and pulling grass from the edge of an active infestation sometimes reveals small, fast-moving black and white insects right at the base of the blades. Compacted soil from years of foot traffic along a regular path, like the route from a back door to a shed, tends to produce a persistently thin, stressed strip that struggles every single summer regardless of watering, since the real problem is roots that cannot push down into hardened soil rather than any kind of seasonal stress at all. A sharply rectangular or oddly geometric dead patch, especially one that appeared right after a delivery, a construction project, or equipment being parked on the lawn, is almost always physical damage rather than anything related to heat or watering, and no amount of testing the grass chemistry or watering pattern will explain a shape that lines up perfectly with where a truck or a stack of material happen to sit. So to recap, before you water more, reseed, or give up on a brown patch of lawn, grab a handful of the grass and give it a firm tug. If it resists and the crown still shows some pale color, it is dormant, not dead, and a light watering along with patience is really all it needs. If it pulls up loose with a dry, uniformly brown crown, no amount of extra water is going to change that, and the honest fix is reseeding once the season is right, ideally after figuring out what actually killed that section in the first place. Running this simple test before you reach for the hose or the reseeding bag saves you from wasting water on grass that cannot use it and from tearing out grass that never needed to be replaced at all. If you want the complete month-by-month plan for your specific lawn, covering exactly what to do and when so you are never just guessing, the ebook I wrote is linked in the description below, or scan the QR code on screen to grab it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.